Now, the government of Iran, as we all know, is a strictly fundamentalist Islamic government, meaning they don't like gay people, they certainly don't like women's rights, religious liberty, unless, of course, it's their religion, as well as stifling free speech and basically the freedoms of a lot of their people. Now, the Iranian government is now reported to be cracking down on activists that are looking to change that. Now, Amnesty International announced on Wednesday that dozens of women's rights activists in Iran were being arrested and interrogated for spurious charges of espionage and trying to overthrow the government. Well, that's kind of a classic thing. If you're doing something, if you're protesting something, the government doesn't like it, well, immediately they're going to say, oh, you're trying to, you're spying on the government for the Western powers, as I'll get into later, or you're trying to overthrow the government. Now, it's funny, we kind of do something like that here, but we just end up calling them terrorists. Now, let me get into the details. From Sam Reisman, who wrote for Mediaite, he writes, since January, more than a dozen women's rights activists in Tehran have been summoned for long interrogations by the Revolutionary Guards and threatened with imprisonment on national security-related charges. Well, that sounds pretty serious. So, once again, what do they actually do to threaten national security? Well, the report says that many of these activists had been involved in a campaign launched in October, which called for the increased representation of women in Iran's parliamentary elections. Well, how dare we have increased representation of women? Somehow that's a threat to national security. I don't understand. No, what it is that it's a threat to their control over women. Well, of course we're not going to let women to vote or to be a part of the process. We're not going to let them get elected because they're going to start passing pro-women stuff. Well, we can't have that. No, of course not. So that's why they're fighting this. That's why they're going after this. The primarily male-dominated fundamentalist government obviously wants to keep that control over their women. Now, the report further states that women taken in for interrogations have been given no reason for their summonses, but once inside in the interrogation room were bombarded with accusations of espionage and collusion with foreign-based currents seeking the overthrow of the Islamic Republic system. Furthermore, Amnesty understands that the Revolutionary Guards subjected the women to verbal abuse, including gender-related slurs. The activists were not allowed to be accompanied by their lawyers during interrogations, which in some cases lasted 8 hours. So, look, this is brutal, right? You've got this situation where the government of Iran, the police, the secret police, right, are coming after people who are saying, hey, we just want more representation. That's all. All we're asking for is that our views be represented in government. No. Can't have that. We must rule you with an iron fist, and you shall have no freedom. Awful, man. Now, here's the other thing, right? There's a story that went viral a little while ago, and I didn't really get a chance to cover it, but there was a social media campaign done by Iranian men. Now, what he would do, or what they would do, I should say, is that they would post pictures of themselves wearing hijabs. Well, in Iran, women are forced to wear a hijab whenever they're out, right? They've got this strict Islamic law that says, look, women must be covered if they're outside. Well, there's a lot of Iranian men, especially younger people, that don't agree with that law. So they started a social media campaign where they would post pictures of themselves, the Iranian men, with hijabs, and pictures of Iranian women without hijabs. That's kind of awesome. Now, unfortunately, these people, as I've said, might be some of the among that are being targeted by the Islamic government. And that sucks. Now, according to Magdalena Mughrabi, Interim Deputy Middle East and North Africa Program Director at Amnesty International, she says it is utterly shameful that the Iranian authorities are treating peaceful activists who seek women's equal participation in decision-making bodies as enemies of the state. Speaking up for women's equality is not a crime. We are calling for an immediate end to this heightened harassment and intimidation, which is yet another blow for women's rights in Iran. She also adds, that rather than addressing Iran's disturbing record on women's rights, the Iranian authorities have once again opted for repression, accusing women's rights activists of collusion in Western orchestrated plots in a bid to maintain their discriminatory practices towards women. Well, just like we always go to terrorism here in America, in Iran and a lot of those Middle Eastern countries, because we actually have done things like this, remember, we kind of had the CIA install a puppet government in Iran until they overthrew it. Well, now, anytime they have any issue, whether it's legitimate or not, they'll come out and say, it's just you Westerners that are, stirring shit up. All of our citizens, they're loyal. They're loyal to the Quran. They're loyal to Islam, the Islamic government. No, these are people that are repressed that want to be free, that want to have some personal freedoms and representation. But they'll always go back to that whole thing of, because of our involvement before, specifically in Iran, but it happens in other places, if there's any kind of protest, it's always Western agitators. It's always the Western agitators, and they use that excuse to shut down protest. It's kind of sad to see that happen. It's super sad to see that happen. Now, overall, though, this is a problem with fundamentalist religion in the government. See, Islam right now in some places is incredibly repressive, right? Now, to some of those who say that, well, yeah, of course, Islam, that's the nature of Islam. Don't forget, man, the Bible also calls for a lot of the same things that right now people in Muslim countries do practice. They call for example, the Bible calls on women to dress modestly. And of course, Christianity has in its past, and still today, has its own issues with women's rights. In fact, as I point out, it still does. You've got pastors here in America that are still preaching that women should be subservient to their husbands and are actively trying to get elected and pass their own versions of Christian Sharia law. That's a problem. So, look, anybody who thinks, well, we're obviously a better culture, Christianity's obviously always been better than Islam. No, you need to get off your high horse and realize that all religions can be dangerous and repressive as Islam when taken to their extremes. Right now, Islam in some of these countries, especially in Iran, has been taken to its extreme. And it didn't used to be like that. Now, finally, on that subject, I do want to address some of the people that are like, that are saying, you know what, you liberals, you just love Islam because you're defending moderate Muslims and refugees. When obviously they're look, Ann Coulter calls them, I forget the term. I know I bring up Ann Coulter saying something horrible and I can't remember what it is. Amazing. But they're basically, she called them lesser cultures, right? Lesser cultures that are, going to hurt America. They're transforming America. No, they're actually not transforming America, okay? And no liberal is going to support the idea of repressing women. That's not a liberal idea. That's not a progressive idea. Look, just because you stick up for refugees that are fleeing awful fundamentalism. I mean, ISIS is as fundamentalist as it gets, right? There is crazy fundamentalist, strict reading of the Quran, even though they pick out all the bad parts and enforce those when they don't actually look at any of the good parts. And look, because there are good parts of every religion. Come on, let's be honest. There are good parts of the Bible. There are good parts of everything. And there's also a lot of horrible parts. Well, ISIS picks out the horrible parts and enforces those. And so does, apparently, the government of Iran. Now, sticking up for these refugees that are leaving those places to come to America to live in a less repressive place, well, that doesn't mean that you're subscribing to the beliefs of those people. Okay? Just because you defend them on certain things doesn't mean you believe in everything that they believe or you're defending that belief. That's a severely limited way of thinking. It's black and white thinking, and it doesn't get you anywhere. Now, There is also this nonsense that if you support President Obama's Iran deal, that somehow you also agree with everything Iran does. No, that's not it at all. Look, I agree with the deal, right? I'm not exactly in favor of the Iranian government. I wouldn't be criticizing them so much if I loved everything that Iran did, right? I don't like the fact that they're a fundamentalist government. I don't like that they repress their people, that they repress women. They're a terrible government, right? But also, I also have to note that I'm not a fan of any religion either. Anybody who watches the show knows that I'm a hardcore atheist, right? So to insinuate that I would agree with Islam based on that is absurd. Besides, if making deals with other countries means that you support that country and its goals, then I guess you could say, using that logic, the Republican Party loves and supports communism. Now, why would I say something that absurd? Well, after all, it was Nixon that went to China and opened the way for, hey, trade relations. Right now, we're in a bunch of deals with the communist government of China. Well, if you make a deal with somebody, then you subscribe to their beliefs, right? No, that's ridiculous. That's absurd. But there are some people who believe that in the case of making a deal with Iran that's ultimately beneficial. Another example is Ronald Reagan. You know, Ronald Reagan made a deal where he traded arms for hostages. Do you think that he loved Islam or loved what Iran was doing by making that deal? No, he wanted the hostages to come home. I don't agree with that deal because he gave them weapons. But nonetheless, I will defend Reagan and say that he didn't love Islam or Iran. Because that's ridiculous. That's ludicrous. And anybody making that argument is an idiot. But anyway, the point that I'm saying is that, look, I like the deal, right? Because what it does is that, yes, it loosens some of the sanctions on Iran, but in return, we get to know that they're scrapping their nuclear weapons. Now, to think that that's giving them nuclear weapons and in support of the government, that's ridiculous. It makes no sense. But look, bottom line for Iran, they need to at least join the 20th century, right? Now, it's my hope that they can do that because there are a lot of young people in Iran that are fighting right now, and we tend to ignore that. We tend to ignore the people who are fighting for more equal representation, for more personal freedoms and rights. We forget those people. We tend to think of Iran and the people in it as a monolith, but it's not. The government is incredibly repressive and terrible. That doesn't mean all the people there are. So we just have to remember that. And of course, I hope that the ideas of freedom, secularism, and inclusiveness for everybody continue to spread around Iran until one day that government that right now is we're so incredibly hostile to turns into something far different than what it is. It may take a long time, but eventually it's going to get there. Hey everybody, if you like this video, then please like this video and share. And if you want to see more like this, then please hit that subscribe button below.